You can cut it with a handsaw, drop a block in water. It floats. It weighs less than a fifth of a standard cinder block. A wall section made from it holds in a certified fire test for 4 hours at 2000 degrees without structural failure. It does not rot. Insects cannot eat it. It does not burn, because there is nothing in it to combust. Across much of Germany, it is the default material for new homes. Across Sweden, Poland, the United Kingdom, entire neighborhoods built from it, still standing decades later, indistinguishable from the outside. In the United States, there are a handful of manufacturers, and if you want a conventional mortgage on a house built with it, most banks will look at you and say no. The material is called autoclaved aerated concrete, AAC, and the story of why you have probably never heard of it is not a story about building science. It is a story about who the American housing system was designed to protect, and it was not you. If you believe the safest homes should not be a secret, subscribe and stay with us. This channel exists to dig up exactly this. Here is the first thing most people assume when they hear this. They assume the material must be unproven, experimental, dangerously expensive, or banned outright. None of those are true. AAC has been in continuous commercial production since the 1920s. It appears in the International Building Code. In Florida, in Texas, and in several other high-wind states, it is fully legal to build with it. Cost per square foot is comparable to wood frame construction in most American markets. It is not exotic. It is not theoretical. It has been holding buildings up for a century, so why isn't everyone building this way? The obstacle is not in the engineering. It is not in the code book. It lives in a document most homebuyers never read, a 200-page mortgage lending guideline. And to understand how it got there, you have to go back to a housing crisis in Scandinavia in the years just after the First World War. In 1923, a Swedish architect named Johan Axel Eriksson was trying to solve a problem that would sound familiar today. Europe needed housing, quickly, cheaply, and out of materials that were not in short supply. Eriksson began experimenting with a simple idea. What if you could take a standard cement slurry and introduce a gas-forming reaction into it? Not to weaken the structure, but to create millions of microscopic air pockets throughout the material, then cure the whole thing under pressurized steam. The result was a block that was rigid and load-bearing, but weighed almost nothing. That floated, that you could cut with a carpenter's saw on a job site. That provided insulation values far beyond what ordinary masonry could achieve, and that, because it contained no organic material whatsoever, simply would not burn. By the post-war period, AAC was being manufactured and adopted at scale across Europe. Germany built subdivisions with it. Sweden built entire towns. The material moved from invention to infrastructure in a matter of decades. In America, none of that happened. The Federal Housing Administration had already written its underwriting guidelines around wood frame construction before AAC was commercially available here. The framing lumber industry was entrenched in building codes, in contractor training, in supply chains, in the vocabulary of American construction. A new material, even a better one, would need to fight for every inch of ground, and fighting for ground costs money. Now here is the part that sounds like it should be simple, but is not. AAC works because of that internal air matrix. Aluminum powder is mixed into a cement slurry, triggering a reaction that inflates millions of tiny voids throughout the material before it sets. The block is then cured in an autoclave, a pressurized steam chamber, which gives it the compressive strength it needs. The result is a material that is mostly air, encased in a rigid calcium silicate structure. That air matrix is why the block floats. It is why the R value per inch is significantly higher than wood. It is why wind pressure from a hurricane, rather than finding a shear plane to exploit, distributes itself across the mass. It is why fire cannot progress through the wall. There is no fuel, no pathway, nowhere for the combustion to go. Before we continue, here is something the critics of this material are actually right about, and it matters. DIY aircrete, the foamed cement mixtures you can watch people pour in backyards on YouTube, is not AAC. It is not the same material. It is not cured under pressurized steam. It does not go through the same testing. The compressive strength of DIY foamed concrete can be 4 to 6 times lower than industrial autoclaved aerated concrete. When you see a YouTube project crack or sink or fail, that is what failed, not this. The conflation of the two is one of the reasons AAC struggles to build a credible reputation in American consumer culture, and it is worth being precise about it. Every subscriber to this channel makes it harder to bury the distinction between what actually works and what the internet thinks works. Stay with us now. The villain, not a secret cabal, not a shadowy conspiracy. Something more boring and more damaging. A set of institutional incentives that are working exactly as designed. The American Wood Council maintains a large code advocacy operation. Staff dedicated to monitoring, influencing, and participating in the cycles that produce the International Building Code. That code is updated every 3 years. The materials on its standard-approved pathway list reflect, among other things, decades of lobbying effort, industry-funded research, and committee participation. Getting an alternative material into that standard pathway requires manufacturers to fund their own testing programs, submit their own evaluation reports, and navigate an approval process that can take years and cost tens of thousands of dollars. For a material with limited American market share and a handful of domestic producers, that cost is a genuine barrier. The code is not rigged in the way a courtroom is rigged. It is rigged in the way that any system is rigged, when one side has decades of institutional presence and the other side is starting from scratch. But for this video, the building code is the secondary villain. The primary villain wears a suit and works in a glass office in Washington. The Federal Housing Finance Agency, the FHFA, oversees Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two government-sponsored enterprises that back the majority of conventional mortgages in the United States. Roughly 7 in 10 new home loans flow through their guidelines. Those guidelines determine what can be financed with a standard 30-year mortgage. And those guidelines contain a requirement that, for properties with unusual or non-traditional construction types, a reliable appraisal must be supported by comparable sales, recent sales of similar homes in the same market. Here is the chain reaction that produces. In most American counties, there are not enough AAC homes that have recently sold to establish a set of comparables. Without comparables, an appraiser cannot reliably determine market value. Without a reliable appraisal, a lender cannot issue a conforming loan, a loan that Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac will purchase on the secondary market. Without a conforming loan, the buyer must find a portfolio lender, a bank or credit union that holds the loan on its own books rather than selling it. Portfolio lenders charge for that risk, typically a rate that is meaningfully higher than a conventional mortgage, sometimes close to a full percentage point or more above what a wood frame home buyer would pay. Sometimes they decline entirely. AAC has been commercially available in the United States for roughly 30 years. It still has no standard pathway in Fannie Mae's lending guidelines. It needs no replacing. That is exactly the problem. Think about what the conventional housing system is optimized to finance. A wood frame home in a hurricane zone has an actuarial model. Insurers know the loss curves. Banks know the comparable sales. Appraisers know the depreciation schedule. And every time that home is destroyed, every time the storm comes and the walls fail and the roof separates, the cycle begins again. A new mortgage, a new insurance policy, new lumber, new contractors, new permits. The economy of rebuilding is enormous. A house that survives every storm, that does not rot or burn or blow apart, that holds its structure for generations without intervention. That house does not feed the cycle. The system has no model for it, because the system was never designed around the possibility that the first house could also be the last one. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. Now look at what that actually costs a family. Think about a coastal county in Florida after a major storm, the kind of footage you have seen. Aerial shots of a subdivision where the streets are still there, the driveways are still there, and where the houses used to be, there are bare concrete slabs. a field of slabs extending in every direction. And somewhere in that frame, at the edge of the debris field, there is a structure still standing. Walls intact, roof attached, windows gone, but the framing holding. The neighbor's slab is visible 30 feet away, empty. The debris line stops at one wall. You hold on that roof line. You cut to the interior. The ceiling is intact. The house you have already seen in our earlier video. That structure, in that coastal county, that is not an anomaly. Post-storm engineering surveys have found repeatedly that concrete mass construction outperforms light wood frame in high wind events. The physics is not contested. The outcome is not in dispute. What is in dispute, apparently, is whether the people who survive inside those walls deserve to finance the next one at the same rate as everyone else. In documented cases, homeowners who built with ICF, insulated concrete forms, a first cousin to AAC, have gone to refinance years later and been denied, not because they were bad credit risks, not because the house was unsafe, because there were no comparable sales in their county, because an appraiser who had never valued a concrete home could not find a number to put on it, because the system that was supposed to protect them had no category for a house that was still standing. The bank didn't refuse because the house was risky. It refused because it was too good. So what can you do with this information? If you are in Florida or Texas, AAC has an active pathway in the state building code. Post-Hurricane Andrew, Florida's code reforms opened the door to concrete mass construction in which most of the country has not followed. Several other high-wind states have similar provisions. Comment the word mortgage below, just that word, and we will send you the current list of portfolio lenders and credit unions in Florida and Texas that are actively financing AAC and ICF construction, along with a state-by-state code breakdown. If you are not ready to build a full home, start smaller. An accessory dwelling unit, a garage, an addition. The loan amounts are lower, which makes portfolio lending more accessible, and the completed project creates the comparable sale that the next buyer in your county will need. Find your financing path before you design, not after. The lender's requirements shape what you can build, and a portfolio lender who has financed AAC before is worth more than an architect's rendering you cannot get a loan for. And when you apply, hire an appraiser with documented experience in alternative construction, not someone who has heard of it, someone who has valued it. If this channel has helped you understand something the system would rather you didn't, subscribe and share it. Every video we make is a document that the industry will not produce for you. Here is where we return to the beginning. A block you can cut with a handsaw, a block that floats in a bucket of water, a wall section that holds for 4 hours in a 2,000-degree fire, a house that is still standing when every house around it is a slab. The American housing system finances what it can replace. It has built codes, lending guidelines, appraisal standards, and insurance models around the premise that homes are temporary, that they will be damaged, that they will depreciate, that they will eventually be rebuilt. A material that disrupts that premise is not welcome by the system. It is simply left outside it, in a category with no standard pathway, no comparable sales, no conventional loan, and no model. And the family that chooses to build with it, in the safest house on the street, pays a higher rate for the privilege of having survived. The house survived every storm. The bank was the only thing that knocked it down.